Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, this is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Question Guy podcast. I'm here with Matthew Brackett, and oh my goodness, Matthew has a story to tell us. And we've spoke offline before, and I don't even know where to start this conversation, Matthew, because there's just so much here. And you're on a mission. So you're one of those special people that you're on a mission. And I could hear it, I could see it, I understand it when I listen to you. Let's talk about that. Where do you want us to get started?
Thank you, Dr. Keith. That means a lot. You just reminded me of a song that I put on a Instagram reel not too long ago, which is "A Man on a Mission." And when I heard it, that wouldn't be like the type of music that I would put with myself. But when I heard the words, it resonated. And then when you saying that, I'm intrigued by what people see in me because I would like to think that I'm a man on a mission. But I think, but I'm also clarifying because of what we're going to talk about in our story of this life transition that I'm in. I think I'm trying to clarify, but maybe it's more clear to me than I think it is. So,
Well, let's talk about that.
right, I am very passionate about the human person. I like to say that I am in love with the human person, who the human being is, the dignity, the complexity, the beautiful complexity of the human person, in the highs and the lows and everything that that means, and the mystery of the human person, that we are mystery to ourselves.
Hmm.
And unveiling that mystery and working with people in the unveiling of that mystery. But we still, what's interesting is that's not something that we can do on our own, but that's something that we need other people to help us with.
Okay.
And, and I've come to those conclusions just through life. But I love that phrase. It's the famous philosopher that said that we are mystery unto ourselves. And I think it's very true, right? And in our life is a sort of a discovery of that mystery. And it's sort of like also treasure hunt because we're looking for meaning, we're looking for purpose. And but we're also discovering ourselves in the process. I think it's fascinating. I love to walk with people in that. And I've also in my journey, I've allowed people to walk with me to help me discover myself better. And we need that as human beings. We need to see sort of to have someone in front of us who's a mirror in a certain way,
Mhm.
to mirror us back to ourselves, to reflect us back to ourselves. We can hear ourselves and we can discover a bit more about ourselves.
So
That was
true.
a bit
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but I suppose that's a little bit of what I'm on a mission to do.
So when did your mission start? So who are you? Tell us some backstory, if you can.
Who am I? Matthew Brackett. And I love to one of my taglines is lead better, love better, and live better. And we'll get to that also maybe later on when we
Okay.
talk on another podcast. But where I'm from, small town New England, sort of like a farm boy. Grew up in a very small town. If you picture New England, you picture the green and obviously the trees, the grass, the white colonial houses, the church, on the common, all that. That's what I grew up around. And I'm the 10th of 13 children.
What,
My
what, what, what?
10th of 13
10
children.
of 13.
And
Wow.
my mother was a daughter of immigrants, Italian immigrants.
Okay.
Dad's roots go back to the Mayflower. So we have a direct link to people that came over on the Mayflower. So he was part of the Puritan Society. Now, some people wouldn't like that, with our history. But
Wow.
anyway, I date back to those roots. On my dad's side, on my mom's side, Italian. So her parents were Italian immigrants and everything that meant. Um, and they're very generous people. So they got married young. My dad's an electrical engineer. My mom was a nurse. They met, I think, in college. While they were finishing college, they got married and they just wanted to have as many kids as possible. And not only that, they adopted two children. So I have two siblings that are adopted. And I always say that they wanted to improve the quality. Right? So they had to outsource. so they so yeah, so my
I hope not.
I'm just kidding. I just say that in a joking manner. So I have an adopted sister and adopted brother. But it shows this is the heart of my parents, how generous they are. And not only that, in our home, the doors were always open to other people, friends, family, people that were going through troubles. As often as I can remember, we always had other people living with us.
Hmm.
people who needed a roof. So it was very, I come from a Catholic background, Christian Catholic, and so they were just trying to live the gospel in so many ways. So that's where I grew up, and my parents made sure that we would. So what they wanted was that home would be so enjoyable and be like this huge playground that our friends and cousins would always come to our house. So and they did that. We had a few acres. It was sort of a farmland, and then it was our place for creativity and for playing, and it was so many great stories. Now they also had a few animals. They bought some ponies, some chickens, and sheep, and all. And that was it's not like we were farmers. That was just to educate and train the children to be responsible and that we would have chores. Right. So that, and obviously nature is a wonderful thing, being close to animals and all that. But from a very young age, we had to take care of the animals. We had to clean the pasture. We had to clean the stalls. We had to feed the chickens winter, whether it was snow and rain, whatever it was, at
And
six,
there's
7,
cold weather in,
Massachusetts, yeah.
yeah.
Melting the ice for the chickens so that and giving them fresh water, things like that. I was like 6 or 7 years old. So that was their vision. They want our children to have this is their home, that all the friends, the people, I think our families, friends and family members and relatives, they found it fascinating to come to our house. Like there was just so many things to do. Then it was a place for our creative minds. And we played sports, and they built us an indoor, I mean not indoor, in-ground swimming pool. So that again, it was just to make that space where we could feel at home and also just have a playground. And then we started working from a very young age. I remember working in strawberry fields and the orchard, and all my older siblings worked in the orchard that was nearby. So that was just the way they educated us. We went to small Catholic school growing up. And that was this. It was very traditional sort of Catholic family, traditional background, sort of small town New England. Um, and very close to faith communities. And so I grew up in that. But what that did to me, it did a few things. One is it gave me a lot of values about life, about who we are as human beings, about faith. And it made me want to aspire to do something impactful in the world, something that lasted in time and also in eternity, an
Okay.
eternal impact. And I wanted to do something transcendental, something different, something bigger. And
When
so that
did you
was,
start to realize that that was important to you?
I think, I don't know, as I look back, maybe I realize it. I don't know if I would have been able to phrase it as that. I suppose what I can say is I had a restless heart. And so I want to do something impactful. I really can't answer that question because I don't know if I would have phrased it
Okay.
that way being in high
Okay.
school. Um, and then the other thing is I just wanted to get out of small town New England. I was like, this is too, I don't know. And I couldn't phrase it back then, but there was just something inside of me that said, this is too small for me. And I think I just wanted to go out. And so now that led me to making a decision. I did a volunteer, I graduated high school, I did a volunteer year with a Catholic organization. And during that year, I decided to go all in, to join the seminary, to join this religious group, and start a journey of education and training to be what they call in the Catholic Church a religious and then a priest. So part of a religious order, that part of the Jesuits, the Franciscans, Dominicans, so a global organization like that. So I joined that, and now as I look back, I joined for some of the reasons that I said. I wanted to do something impactful. I also wanted to get out of small time New England, but there was a sense of duty and obligation behind it. It's sort of like the way we were sort of brought up and educated is um our path to holiness, your path to goodness, path to heaven, it has to be difficult, right? And that if you want to do something meaningful, do something heroic. So I guess that was also the impactful thing. I want to do something heroic, do something meaningful. So I was like, well, this looks pretty hard, right? It looks
Becoming a
fast.
priest.
Yes, becoming a priest. It
Okay.
looks really hard, right? You take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, right? And it's total dedication. It looks hard, but it's fascinating. So that must be for me because it looks really hard, right? And it's a big sacrifice. So probably not the best reasons, but that's what I had when I was 18.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
I don't know if I could have verbalized it in those words, but as I look back on my story, that's sort of what was the guiding motivation. And I started and I didn't look back. I said, well, this morning I'm gonna go all in. And I didn't look back for a good few decades. And that's what I did. And fascinating, it's just I was very gifted in that they brought me to, I did my philosophy training, my theology training in Italy. I did some work in the States. And then after 10 years of training and education, I received what they call the priestly ordination as a Catholic priest. And I was Christmas Eve in Rome, be ordained a priest, right? The whole symbolism there of Christmas is the birth of Jesus, and sort of a priest who represents Christ in a certain way. So that birth of a new Christ, that's the sort of the symbolism of having it around Christmas. So 2002 received ordination as a priest, and I stayed on in Rome. I was studying, but I was also working. I was working in formation and education, mentoring other people who were in training for priesthood. And then in 2004, I got assigned to Colombia as a director of seminary in Colombia, South America.
Mm.
And I fell in love with that country, and with the people, and it was sort of it was my first Latin American experience. And I'm speaking to you from Mexico, so I fell in love with the Latin American culture and the people and the way their outlook on life and so many things. So I was in Colombia for 2 years. Again, there's so much we could talk about that. And then I get sent to Ireland, also as a director of a seminary and our operations in Ireland and England. There for 5 years. Again, fascinating, so many experiences there. And Ireland's such a beautiful country. I think I've never seen. Again, there's so many good views around the world. There's just so many. There's something unique about the Emerald Isle. So as you can see, I'm already at this point. I'm in a good number of years of leadership roles in the organization, but I've also experienced a bit of burnout at this period. Our organization goes through a massive crisis. I'm going through an internal sort of turmoil of like something just wasn't fitting, and I didn't know what it was. But I was in leadership role, so you try to make it work, right? And then we were in crisis management, it's always taking care of people and trying to make it work. But I get sent back. Then I asked for a break. I get sent back to Colombia to work a little bit, and then from there I get reassigned to Chile. Again, it's farther south in South America. Another fascinating experience. And there I work more with lay people, with civilians, and in spiritual, we call spiritual direction, spiritual guidance, retreat, giving retreats, accompanying individuals, accompanying couples, and a lot of that type of ministry, working in schools. Again, so many wonderful experiences, visiting the sick, doing a lot of weddings, funerals, baptisms, all those, just again, being with the people in their highest and most joyful moments, and also in the most difficult. Mm-hmm. And then I get reassigned to Rome, and I was the director of an international residence for priests there. So it was another fascinating experience, because I was working with people from all over the world, from representing 20 different countries, and probably 4 continents. Mm-hmm. Where they're sent to Rome to study a master's or a doctorate degrees, and we look to we take them in and to give them to what they would call a priestly community, where they could live their priestly life, priestly fraternity, formation, and education in that environment in Rome. And so again, so much access to cultures from all over the globe, and which is just wonderful people. And so I finished. I was working on 2 parallel master's degrees in Rome at that point, and I finished those, and then I raised the white flag. Okay, what was that about? I was like,
You're giving up.
Go back to, yes, we go back to, well, basically giving up, or at least saying I can't do this. I have to revisit a few things inside of me. I don't know what's going on.
Well, earlier you said you were going through some internal turmoil. Can you share any of that?
Again, 7. This is 7 years that goes on.
Right.
Of carrying this. There's a few things behind it. One is the burnout, right? There was no self-care. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to deal with myself. I knew how to take care of a lot of other people, but not of myself.
Right.
And so really just physical and emotional and psychological burnout. But I think also the lifestyle just led me to be somewhat disconnected from myself. And another thing that was happening I mean, the Catholic priesthood, while there's many beautiful things about it, it's also a very unique lifestyle. And if it's not for you, and
It's
it's
very,
some,
isn't it very isolated because you spend a lot of time with
I
yourself.
it's you do. We all spend a lot of time. I think everyone has I think everyone experiences a bit of loneliness. Two different things. One is a little bit of loneliness that we all experience in some way. Isolation, I is another thing which can happen, and even it can happen that priests, and I think I did it in a certain way. I self-isolate, but because I was going through all this stuff, I didn't. It makes it more difficult to be with people,
Right.
and at least in my case. There's different ways that people deal with all this. So I'm just this is my story. So I just see that it created some because there's who knows, there's a lot of theories of why this happened, but just created the disconnect for myself. And then, from a young age, put in leadership roles, I'm trying to live up to these high ideals. I'm trying to live up to who I represent and what I represent, and I get lost along the way. And so that started in 2009, 2010. Right. And then what happens with that naturally as human beings, right? And given the vows that we take of poverty, chastity, obedience, naturally something's gonna give. And oftentimes in the human person, when things aren't going well, they can give in our sexuality, right? So I began a lot of viewing of pornography. Again, people will have different opinions of whether that's right or wrong or indifferent. According to my convictions and the way I was trained, well, that wasn't a good thing. So it creates more guilt, creates more shame, right? It's not a healthy living of sexuality, right? And so that just becomes an addictive behavior. Trying to, again, it's about the self-medication to medicate the pain that I'm going through, the confusion and the identity crisis. But it just makes things worse. It doesn't resolve anything. So little by little, and then I think there's some depression that goes along with this, because I remember for a good number of years it was like just walking through quicksand is the image that comes to mind of it. It was just so hard to keep going, but I kept going. I mean, when I look back, it's like, I don't know how I did it, because I just pushed, and I at some point I think people were realizing that something wasn't right. Oftentimes people realize before we do, right? Others realize it themselves.
Yeah, they could see. Yeah.
Right, I can see, and I was, you're just trying to make it work, trying to make it work. And because of the culture of the organization, where people didn't know how to address it or how to show care. So, and there's a whole lot there that we could talk about. But anyways, the short version is I was just trying to make things work, right? But I remember it was hard. It was hard to begin every day and to make things work every day. Now, with the wonderful thing in ministry is I'm energized by interaction with other people. So that was a benefit, is when I was, doing good, preaching the message, bringing, nourishing people spiritually. That was invigorating. But then I would go back home and back really to myself and to sort of that emptiness and the loneliness,
Mhm.
right? That I didn't want to live like that. So there's a lot of just these pressures around the lifestyle, around what just happened to me, where this disconnect. And again, that went on for a number of years. And it had emotional consequences, psychological consequences, sexual consequences as I've already explained. Then with the shame and the guilt, to a point where I hated myself, I hated my life, I hated who I was and where I was at, and that's why I really felt stuck. And that's a very hard thing. And I emphasize this because for your listeners, it can be a common experience for human beings that at some point in life we can feel stuck
Mhm.
and we don't know what to do.
Mhm.
And I have to admit, because of that self-hatred and hatred of where I was at, I think it was during that stage in my life where I understood why people would take their life. Well, it never became something that I thought of doing, but there were definitely moments when I did not want to be alive, when I wished I wasn't alive. Yeah, but I didn't have a plan. I like to differentiate between sometimes we're in a moment in life when we just wish we weren't alive because of the pain we're going through, or the complex decisions that have to be made. And that's where Um, what we, and sometimes in depression, people can suffer from insomnia or hypersomnia, where they sleep a lot. So that was sort of my case. I just was always tired, right? And sleep became a way that I would just escape from life,
Hmm.
right? Because you just don't have to think, but what happens? And you wake up and you still have the face. So in the midst of that, what's I suppose was amazing as I look back is during all of that, I was in some high profile leadership roles, like trying to make things work, and I was finishing 2 degrees. Right. And so I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And I suppose what drove me is I said I want to find out what all this is about, and I want to make sense of this. And I didn't know what the sense was, but I said I want to get through this and find an answer. At that time, I had also been thinking about military chaplaincy. Part of it was because I just wanted to get away from the institutional element that I was involved in. I said, why not go to another institution? But anyway, I wanted to do a different type of ministry. I wanted to minister to a very diverse crowd,
Okay.
and not just to Catholics. And also I knew that military chaplaincy would do a lot for me in my own personal growth. And then at this point, I would have a lot to offer. So that became a driving force. I want to finish this and I want to figure a little bit of this out because that's what I want to do.
Okay.
And I knew that stepping away from the organization, from certain parts of the institution, that I would have some space to reflect and to better discern about my next decisions. And at this point, I had put, his priestly ministry in the right place for me, which was I resisted doing that for a long time. Right. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, not only in ministry, but it can be relationships, it can be committed relationships, it can be other stuff, a job, right? And it's so interesting because I sat with this for 10 years. And people that and I'll fill in the timeline in a second, but people that I've talked to a lot, whether it be about jobs, whether it be about relationships, whether it be about even just in ministry, it's an interesting common denominator. I've seen that 10 years seems to be a common thing that people go to where they sit with something and not knowing how to deal with it or what to do. Right, it's 2017. I actually signed myself into inpatient care to a clinic because of the darkness where I was at. That's when I raised the white flag. And I said, all right, I need to really take care of myself and to figure out, and I need to go to a safe place where I can look at all my options and get some professional care. And I say it easily, it's never an easy decision to do that, right? But part of it was because I want to get somewhere after this, and if I don't, I'm not well. And I suppose that was the hardest things to realize for me, is as human beings, we always try to make it work, right? And to come to that realization, and it didn't happen just overnight, but that I am not well, or I'm sick. I'm emotionally, mentally, spiritually sick. Very hard to do. Right? It's so hard for us as human beings, right? And then as men to say that, to recognize it, to own it. And
But you did.
I did. I did.
Good.
And then so I checked myself into inpatient care as a place for people from ministry, whether it be men or women, to get that care. And that was very challenging, but so wholesome and helpful in so many ways. And that was part of a sabbatical year, a year that I took off, and I call that year the year of coming home to myself. And because of that, remember that I said that disconnect from myself. So I went back home. I lived with my dad. At this point, my mother had passed away. So back in small town New England, where I left years ago to go on a mission, to serve people. And then I come back home, really having lost myself in the process. Having done so many wonderful things and had so many experiences, but having grown a hatred for myself and lost myself in the process. And now at this point, going through inpatient care and getting a lot of therapeutic help during this event, it helped me, I suppose, not only be more at peace with myself, but I would say even begin to like myself again, and to grow into a healthy love for myself again, and a growth in self-confidence. And people had always considered me gifted, and that's, but again, because of what I was going through, I never saw it, and I never wanted to recognize it. I didn't like myself. Many people didn't see that side of me. So it was a really a growth in a lot of self-confidence, and just owning my story, owning my life, owning my identity, owning my decisions,
Mm-hmm.
the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm trying to make, I wanted to accept my past and build on that. And because I had rejected it for a long time. So it was about reconciling and integrating my past into my present and wanting to build that, because it had made me, in a certain way, it made me who I was. And there were many wonderful things about that, as we're talking about now. And and then there was a lot of difficult things, and that was part of who I had become, and I wanted to continue to build on that. So then that's when I did the chaplain. After that sabbatical year, I went into the Navy as a chaplain, and it was just such good timing. It was so good for me, and I was at a wonderful place in life, and I think I was able to serve really well and just grow in the process. But it was also space for me to continue thinking about my bigger life decisions, and which I came to clarity about in such a wonderful way, because it was almost like, I've talked about this sort of like the self-loathing or self-hatred, and also at the certain point, it was from a spiritual side. I even felt great rejection towards ministry and towards who I was as a minister and as a priest, and I felt rejection towards the institution, and obviously linked to that is feeling a rejection towards God. Because part of what I had been through, I felt that I had been in, I think a lot of people in spiritual institutions can resonate with this, is that I had been hurt or betrayed or whatever other words you want to use in the name of God.
Hmm.
Even though it wasn't God, but when authority is not well exercised in religious organizations, I could go on a little bit about this around just dysfunctional authority and leadership. Right, but when it's in a faith-based organization, dysfunctional leadership, it's harmful in all areas of life. When it's family, when it's faith-based, it touches a lot deeper fibers of who we are as human beings. Right? And so I think that's why the spiritual and emotional and mental abuse that happens in faith-based organizations is so harmful, because oftentimes it's done in the name of a higher power, a transcendent being, and it directly affects the relationship of the person with God or the higher power, the transcendent being, which is what faith is all about. Right? So it's very contradictory, but that's what happened. So that was a parenthesis. Let's go back into my Navy chaplaincy, where I was at a wonderful place in life, and so much so I was back very comfortable and almost in enjoying my ministry again. I highlight that as it was something I just feel so blessed and gifted to have had that opportunity. And because oftentimes as human beings, we make decisions from a place of pain, from a place of negativity. That's some decisions that I made, right? From a place of anger, from a place of rejection. And I think this big decision in my life of stepping away from ministry, I didn't want to make in one of those moments. And so I was very intentional about everything that I went through and waiting because I wanted to make it from a good place. And so I'm very fortunate that that's what happened. And that's where I received what they call dispensation from priestly obligations and duties. I finished my active duty all in the same week in July of 2021. And then I started a whole new chapter in life. So difficult, so scary, right? That I've made it sound like it all makes sense, right? But I remember, finishing active duty, getting my dispensation. It was 2 very difficult days, because I'm like, what have I done to myself? I've cut all safety nets and supports that I've had. I did it for a lot of the right reasons, but it was like, what have I done to myself? All of my safety, all of my security, all of my identity is or external identity, if you want to call it that, is no longer there. Now it's just me. So is, theoretically it sounded like a good idea, but when the rubber hits the road, when that the moment comes, it's so I was very scared. I was afraid. And and I remember one of those nights crying because like, well, what have I done? Right.
Hmm.
It was 2 days, but then I was like, all right, I remember why I've done all this. Right? And it was from a good place, but it was just there was a grieving process with all of this because there's so many wonderful things about priestly ministry, about the organization that I was part of. I have a lot of friends and what I would call brothers there. And then in the military, it was such a fascinating experience. I have so many friends and that brotherhood, sisterhood that's there. And I was, the uniform, two different types of uniform, and just walking away from that. And there was a lot of loss involved. Loss of identity and certainly, letting go of certain aspects of identity, letting go of a certain status, letting go of a lot of relationships. Because as stepping from ministry into the civilian world, into the lay life, the civilian life, it changes the way people see me, it changes relationships. I lost a lot of relationships. So that's just part of that. And at that same time I started a degree, what I'm finishing over the next few weeks, a master's degree in the psychology of leadership, because at this point, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in the field of coaching and development of people in their personal lives and also in their leadership. I link those together: the way we lead ourselves, the way we lead others, the way we lead in an organizational context. So it involves all of that. And so the coaching and education services that are in line with that. Without going too much, I'm finishing my degree. I'm starting my practice, my business in that field. It's called Bracket Alliance, and I'll be doing it bilingually in English and Spanish. And so with clients in both languages and hopefully on both sides of the border, with Mexico, South America, and also in the States, and wherever it brings me. So it's fascinating sort of moment in my life because I'm beginning a lot of new things that I've planned for over the last few years. And so it's still scary, but it's exciting. And that's where I'm at right now, Dr. Keith. So I know I've spoken for a while. Do you have any questions or comments?
How do you feel?
How do I feel about what?
How do you feel about you?
Thank you for that. There's a few levels to that. I'm in a really good place in life. I'm content with who I am, with where I'm at. And I'm very cautious because even like early mornings when I'm just by myself, I'm like, I want to make sure I don't get disconnected again. And I want to make sure that I'm honest with myself.
Yeah.
So those thoughts, I do have those. I don't want to lie to myself. I don't want to deceive myself, hold myself accountable, or have other mechanisms in place to do that. So that I'm always living according to the values that I have and to who I want to be and become. But I have to say, I'm at a wonderful place in life with a very, I think, a healthy relationship with myself,
Okay.
of healthy self-confidence. And it hasn't been easy, just stepping into this new professional identity has been, I don't wish it on anybody. It's been very challenging. But I had, I suppose, going back to what you said at the beginning, I had a mission, I had a vision, and I've been able to execute it in spite of all the challenges. And now I want to execute even a bigger vision now, which is to continue to serve people in so many ways and in people in many sectors. I don't know what that's going to look like,
Okay.
but I'm trying to put everything in place so that whatever has to happen will happen.
Then let me ask you one more question and we'll end this conversation. And I want to focus this last question on the men who are listening to our conversation. And that would be, what would be a word that you would give them for men who are struggling with their own identity or their own feelings? Because in your conversation, in our conversation, you felt stuck. And that's a place men often do feel or get to because of expectations put on them
Mhm.
by whomever and whatever. How would what would be the first step to get unstuck? Because there's always got to be a first step
There is, and I
to
think I would,
change.
if I was talking to different individuals, the first step might be different. So it's hard for me just to say one, but I can give a few quick principles. So that
Please.
one is we equalize having difficulties or being stuck, some of us, um, with weakness. And sometimes as human beings or as men, we think weakness is unacceptable.
Mm.
I saw that in the military, but it's very common, I think, in any sector of society. Weakness is unacceptable, so therefore I can't have problems.
Mm.
And so we repress our problems, we put them away, we try not to we don't deal with them. And so to say it simply, deal with it. Now let's deal with it in a healthy way, okay?
Okay.
That doesn't sound very good. Deal with it. Now we, as human beings, we want to medicate. So what I'm saying, normally it's pain,
Hmm.
right? And there's something that I didn't say about my story is the befriending pain, because pain taught me so much about myself, about my surroundings, about life, about the decisions I need to make, the health decisions I need to make. As human beings, we want to sort of self-medicate the pain, and that's why we turn to all types of some sort of consumption that's not healthy,
Hmm.
whether overconsumption of food, overconsumption of social media, of the digital world, the virtual world, whatever it is, some substances, whatever it is something, or behaviors, just something that we try to self-medicate. So to look at it like, is there something inside of me that I'm trying to um not, I wouldn't say resolve, but soothe that pain in a way that's not dealing with it.
All right.
And so that's why I go back to dealing with it. And usually, though, as human beings, how do we deal with things? How do we process them? There's many healthy ways, but one of them is with someone else. That was hard for me to do because I was always the point of reference for other people. And I think a lot of us like that. And I tell us a lot in the military, we all love to be the point of reference that we are there to help other people.
Mm.
But we don't like to be the one that reaches out. And I've come across many people, and I was one of them, where I'm always here for you. Right? And other people would say that to me, but I didn't want to. I didn't need it. Right? Sometimes. And so learning to deal with it, because that's how we process things as human beings. We process through communication. We don't process through repression or through self-medication. We process through communication, through transforming whatever we're going through into words, whether it be in writing or verbal.
Mm.
And that's how we begin to make sense of what's going on inside of us. And we begin to take ownership of what's going on inside. And when we begin to take ownership, then we begin to deal with it. That would be the simplest answer I can give.
That's then the simplest is the best, and that's fantastic. Matthew, thank you so much for this conversation. For those who are watching and listening, this has been another edition of the Question Guy podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.